Tensions between the United States and Canada probably haven't been this high since the War of 1812. On today's edition of Locked On Oilers, a preview of the Four Nations face-off final. Canada, the United States, for all the marbles.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very special Four Nations Face-Off final preview episode of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everyone who's making Locked On Oilers their first listen of the day. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On today's show, a full encompassing, wide-ranging preview of the Four Nations Face-Off final between Canada and the United States. We're going to break down our show into our normal three segments. We're going to start with Team Canada, then Team USA. Then I'm going to give you my keys to the game, who I think is going to win, and why I think that team is going to win. So at the outset, let's set the table. I've had goosebumps thinking about this since Monday night, and the final was locked in. Once Canada won their game on Monday against Finland, and we were locked in for a rematch between Canada and the United States, I was thinking about all of the energy from that game Saturday. We spent the entirety of yesterday's episode of Locked On Oilers talking about the game, the takeaways from the tournament. So if you haven't gotten a chance, I would encourage you to check that out. But this is why we play sports. It is for moments like this. And look, I know this isn't the Olympics. I know this isn't a World Cup of hockey. I know we only had 4 federations. I know we haven't played a ton of games. But this is why you love sports if you are a sports fan. The opportunity to see the best in the world at their craft go mano-a-mano to see who's the best. And you can't get any better than this. These are the two best federations in the world, head-to-head, all the marbles, one game. The ultimate Game 7. I know this isn't a best-of-7 series, but the ultimate Game 7 here. One game, do or die. Everybody juiced to the gills. We'll talk about that in depth in the third segment because I do think that's going to be a key. But for Team Canada, you're sitting here going into this final having lost to the United States last Saturday in what was ostensibly a coin flip game. Whether you want to get on Jordan Binnington for the first Guentzel goal, that's a little bit soft, but Guentzel does a good job of disguising the release. The entire way, it looks like Guentzel's going top shelf, but instead he goes low and it catches Binnington by surprise. Okay, you have that, and you have the fact Canada goes 0 for 2 on their power play opportunities in the game. That's ultimately what swings your game right there, those two swings. If you get one of those two power play opportunities to convert into a goal, or Binnington makes that save, you have a very different game. And I know we're doing the Justin Herbert what-if man trope there, but when you're thinking about gaming this out and what Canada needs to do to win this game, number one, most importantly, you have to get to your game. And sports are a living, breathing organism. You know, no matter what you do, if the other team prevents what you want to do, there's only so much you can do. You know, the United States did a really good job tactically of keeping Canada to the perimeter. You know, you go and look at the underlying numbers for the game. Canada had 3 expected goals. The United States had 2.5. Canada had a hard time getting pucks deep in the offensive zone, getting pressure on the goalie. But when they did, the biggest issue was they were missing the net a lot. And that is a testament to the defense the United States played, that if you are getting the puck to dangerous areas, you know, you go look at a shot map for the game. Canada's getting really good looks in tight on the goalie, and the United States defenders are forcing those shots a little bit wide. They're in shooting lanes, preventing those shots from getting on net in the first place. And then, of course, the ultimate fallback, and this is one of the big keys for the United States, they have the decisive goaltending edge here in Connor Hellebuyck, who's been the best goaltender in the NHL in the regular season so far this year. In this tournament, he's been nothing short of his usual remarkable self. And, you know, I said it yesterday, I'll repeat it again quickly here. As someone who's always liked Hellebuyck, his game, it's nice to see him having a good tournament in what's a high stakes situation. You know, somebody who's had difficult playoff runs as a Jet on where he's always been expected to be the best player on a team. So this is refreshing. This is a little bit different in that respect. Number 2, something else to think about from the Canadian perspective. You want to be decisive and you want to be selective. And being selective is multi-layered, and it speaks to a little bit what we just talked about as far as getting pucks in tight on the goalie, putting pressure on Hellebuck, forcing the American defenders to move left to right, to actively play defense. You know, you think about the goal McDavid scores where he just catches Charlie McAvoy a little bit off balance and he goes around him. It's not like McAvoy makes a terrible read there. It's that McDavid's the fastest skater on God's green earth and he got ahead of steam, and McAvoy had to turn his body all the way. And by the time he did, McDavid was all the way around him. So you got that going for you. But one of the keys here, and I forget who said it. I was listening to the Hockey PDO cast yesterday, and Dmitry Filipovich and Thomas Drance were talking about the game, but you want to have the United States actively playing defense. If you're making, Brock Faber or Adam Fox or Zach Werenski or Jake Sanderson, who's going to draw into this game for the injured Charlie McAvoy, if you're making those guys, and look, all of those guys are remarkably gifted hockey players. We'll see whether or not Quinn Hughes can get in over Jake Sanderson. I know there's some conversation and deliberations going on there. The NHL wants to be fair in its adjudication of the rules for its made-up tournament, so they're not just letting the United States play Quinn Hughes, even if Canada is okay with it. But those offensively inclined defensemen, the strong puck movers, those are not physically imposing guys. They're not going to block shots. They're not going to be able to clear the crease as well. That's why Slavin and Faber played so well together. They're good complements for each other. I think Jacob Slavin has been the United States' best defender in this tournament so far. I've been remarkably impressed with his game and his ability to just take away lanes, to use his reach, to force bad passes. And ultimately, that's the key to good defense in today's NHL. You just want to make that other team make a decision half a beat faster. And that's one of the keys to defense in any sport. If you can impact the decision-making process and hurry up the processing of the other team, you are going to have advantages. You are going to make things opportunistic when you have that happen, where if you hurry up the other team's processing on offense and you start messing with their clock and their timing, that's when you start flubbing passes. That's when you start missing the net entirely on shots. And then the third and final key, we're going to the Locked On Oilers dry erase board here to talk about the Canadian power play. And we know Makar is drawing back in, which is good. We want that. In game one against, I think it was Sweden. Yeah, Canada's first game was against Sweden. I keep drawing blanks whether they played Canada or Finland. Canada played Finland or Sweden first. A lot going on in my brain. But in that first game, the Oilers had McDavid on the right circle. They had McKinnon on the left circle. They had Reinhart in the dead middle, and Sid was working the net front. That first goal that McKinnon scores is McDavid to Crosby, across to McKinnon, one-timer. And we have seen the Canadian power play struggle from a phenomena called too many cooks in the kitchen. And when you have this much talent, none of these guys wants to be selfish. They all want to incorporate their teammates. They all want to try and look for that perfect play. But when you look around, your best shot here is probably your Reinhart look or Makar look, because McDavid, as gifted as he is, he's not a trigger man. McDavid is not going to be sitting here with his stick up looking for the one-timer. Can he do that? Yeah. If that's the third or fourth read on a power play of sustained offensive zone time, that's entirely fine. I am good with that. But you don't want to set this up for the one-timer. And then ditto McKinnon. You want McKinnon using his size and his strength to bully the puck inward. You want McKinnon creeping in and in and in. So you effectively have him, in the Zach Hyman role, if you were to make an Oilers comparison, where he's going to be sitting on the back door. And then effectively, if you're Canada, you want this game played in a phone booth when you're on the power play. You want McDavid, Crosby, Reinhart, and McKinnon all within that 20 feet radius of the goal crease, because that's where you're going to force the other team into mistakes. Even if you're not getting a goal, you're forcing the defenders to move, you're forcing the goalie to move, and that's where you can really create some opportunities for yourself. So that's my biggest key for Canada here in this game as far as their power play. They need to get pucks in tight. They need this game played in a phone booth. And most importantly, they just need to shoot. It's okay if you miss, but you got to get shots. You can't be going full 2 minutes with one shot on goal. As good as the talent they have access to here, when you have this much shooting talent and this much overall skill, it's easy to kind of get lost in the mud. And that's kind of what we've seen happened to the Penguins over the last 2 seasons, where they added Erik Karlsson to what was a good power play a few years ago, and it's just too many cooks in the kitchen. We are going to take our first break of today's edition of Locked On Oilers. When we come back, we'll offer the Team USA perspective, then we'll pick the game, keys to the game, and a whole lot more, so be sure to stick around. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you, unsaturated fats to help you keep feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no-shell variety, the perfect grab-and-go snack for a busy day. I was in Florida over the weekend for the Daytona 500. A lot of time in the car, both last week and over the last 2 days. I had more than 1 pack of these in my backpack. They are the perfect high-protein boost. Or if you're old school and you want to crack open the shell, the in-shell option are a classic favorite. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are previewing the Four Nations Face-Off final between Canada and the United States. We just did Canada, on to the Stars and Stripes. So for me, my single biggest takeaway about the United States Hockey Federation through the first 3 games they've played, I have been overwhelmingly impressed with Jack Eichel's game. I knew Eichel was having a good defensive season this year. Watching him play against the Oilers, the 3 games the Vegas Golden Knights have played, he's been as good as you can ask from a 200-foot perspective, and I've been overwhelmingly impressed with the Americans' commitment to really specialization within their lineup, where a guy like Eichel is going to play the most minutes of anyone on this team. And then you have guys that are Norris Trophy winners like Adam Fox playing 13 minutes a game. You have guys like JT Miller only getting 14 minutes. Brock Nelson, Vincent Trocheck, 11, 12 minutes. Extreme specialization of this is what we need you to do. You're only playing 14 minutes a game. Go out there like you have a rocket up your butt and skate your ass off. It's really that straightforward. If you're JT Miller, if you're a Chris Kreider who drew in for the game Monday against Sweden, and that type of specialization, that commitment to doing what's best for the team in best on best is a really key component of what we see as far as successful teams in these best on best tournaments, regardless of sports. You know, the comparison I would give you is Team USA basketball at the Olympics last summer, bringing guys like Devin Booker and Anthony Edwards, who were largely playing off-ball defense and being perimeter defenders against the other team's best shooters. So KD, so LeBron, so Steph got easier matchups. They could conserve energy and worry more about creation on offense. And that's kind of what we're seeing here. So in addition, you are worried if you're the United States as far as your health. You know, Matthew Tkachuk left the Canada game early, didn't play the final 13 minutes of the game. He didn't practice. He didn't play against Sweden. He practiced on Wednesday, so there is a heavy assumption he will play. Brady Tkachuk didn't practice on Wednesday, suffering from the flu that is seemingly kicking everyone in Boston at this point in the tournament's butt. Multiple players on the United States and Sweden on Monday both missed time. Victor Arvidsson and Mattias Ekholm missed the game on Monday for Sweden as well, reduced ice time. Just you have that going around. You have Charlie McAvoy, who's out. He suffered a shoulder injury against Finland, played through it to play against Canada, suffering from an infection, which is going to hamper his season going forward as a member of the Boston Bruins. So the assumption is that Jake Sanderson of the Ottawa Senators, somebody who's young in his NHL career, but is undoubtedly on an upward trajectory. He belongs to be here. You know, if Team USA had its first choice, obviously, they would have had Quinn Hughes as the injury reserve as opposed to Jake Sanderson. And we're going to see whether or not Quinn Hughes was ultimately given permission to play. We'll know pretty early because Quinn is in Vancouver. So for him to get to Boston for tomorrow night's game, he's going to have to leave relatively early. That's a long flight. Do you really want him to go from New Jersey to Vancouver, where he's practiced the last 2 days, back to Boston to Vegas, where Vancouver's first game after the break is on Saturday night? So that's a consideration. How how much energy do your guys have? You sat Austin Matthews for the game against Sweden on Monday because he was feeling a little under the weather as well. You sat Connor Hellebuck. How sharp is he going to be after sitting a game? There are a lot of just lineup management decisions that need to be made. I have been very impressed with the efforts the United States have gotten from Eichel and from Austin Matthews. And you've really built your lineup around those two guys as your 1-2 punch. Matthews and Jack Eichel are really, really good two-way players, arguably the second and third best two-way centers in the entire league behind Sasha Barkov. I've been very impressed with Jack Hughes. And look, I know how most people feel about Jack Hughes. I think there's a burgeoning, uninformed, I should say, consensus amongst the casual hockey fan that he is a flash player. He's a perimeter player. He relies only on speed and finesse. And largely that's true. He's not overwhelmingly physical. He's not going to win puck battles. But his commitment to playing good defense last Saturday against Canada with Austin Matthews was one of the real keys to that game. Matthews and Jack Hughes were getting the McDavid minutes at 5-on-5 and being told, hey, you got to try and use your speed to slow him down through the neutral zone. And that's ultimately, to me, what was the key to the game overall. The United States gets out to that 2-1 lead. And from there, they're able to start putting pressure on Canada, forcing them to make decisions before they want to, speeding up their processing, corralling them to the outside on zone entries, forcing Canada to play defense, to actively play defense and dumping the puck in, using their physicality, forechecking aggressively, having the Tkachuk brothers, JT Miller, Trocheck, Nelson, their bottom six, their specialized guys, having them and the Tkachuk brothers just thumping the Canadian defensemen every single time the puck gets in deep. And when you are playing a team with as much speed and as much skill as Canada has, the United States commitment to forechecking and to putting pressure on the defense is of the utmost importance. We all know the key to slowing down a fast team is forcing them to go the length of the ice every single time. If you can effectively play dump and chase hockey, you can cycle the puck, you defang Canada's attack. You make Connor McDavid play defense, you make Nathan MacKinnon, Sidney Crosby, Mitch Marner, Braden Point, and Marner's a great defender, but you can't play defense forever. And Canada will benefit from Makar being back in this game. I think in transition in particular, he will have an impact in this game. I'll be curious to see if they can find a way to keep Thomas Harley in the lineup as well, who I thought was one of Canada's better defenders in the game last Saturday. So I'm very curious to see the lineup decisions these teams make. I thought pairing Slavin with Faber was great. The two of them were really good complements for each other. Slavin playing active, big body defense, Faber being a traditional puck mover. I was very impressed with Faber's ability to handle the situation for how young he is, how little experience he has in this environment. And the Hanifin-McAvoy tandem was pretty good as well. I am very excited for the matchups to come out, to see who's playing with who. I'll be curious to see if we see the Tkachuk brothers with Jack Eichel again. I do think that line might be a smidge slow for the pace this game is probably going to feature based on what I expect from Canada with Makar drawing back in. So you have that to contemplate. You have to figure out what you're doing with Kyle Connor. If you want Chris Kreider over want someone else as opposed to maybe a Kyle Connor. I personally would still probably stick with Kyle Connor just based on the flash opportunities he gives you. I know Kreider's a good penalty killer. I know the net front opportunities he gives you on the power play, but you're not going to put him on power play one over the Tkachuk brothers at the net front. You just wouldn't do that. Matthew is a better player in every facet. So we're going to take one more break on today's show. When we come back, we'll pick the game, keys to the game, all that good stuff, and more right after this. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday Four Nations Face-Off final preview edition of Locked On Oilers, where we are trying to give you the full scope of the conversation. We've hit Team USA, we've hit Team Canada. Now, for me, the keys to this game are very, very straightforward. Whichever one of these teams is able to execute in transition more successfully, more likely than not is going to win this hockey game, because The Americans fundamentally are more inclined to slow this game down purely to mitigate what Canada wants to do. If Canada splits Connor, Nathan McKinnon, and Braden Point up, and they go 1, 2, 3 down the middle, and they go for speed throughout the lineup and try and run a tempo transition style, for the United States to be successful, they're going to have to slow the temperature of this game down and try to make Canada go the length of the ice every single time. It's not an easy way to live if you're Canada and you have to keep turning around dump and chase retrievals, but there is something to be said for getting to your game and sticking to your game. And that brings me to number 2. Do your job. And that is multifaceted. That is, do your job, what you are here to do, and don't do someone else's job. And I bring that up because you can probably expect some chicanery from the United States, the Tkachuk brothers, JT Miller, etc., as far as trying to make this game more, to get that adrenaline going. And look, for some of these guys, getting punched in the face a few times, it gets the adrenaline going, and then they're lunatics the rest of the game. The U.S. was hitting everything with a pulse in that game last Saturday, and part of that was the adrenaline, the energy of, we're here, we're doing this, we're going to win this game. And I think for the United States, if that worked for them, great. If you're Canada, don't try and be something you're not. Canada doesn't have a Tkachuk brother or a JT Miller. They didn't bring Tom Wilson. They didn't bring in Evander Kane. They don't have a traditional power forward who can kind of match that physicality wise. Colin Parayko can do that to some degree. He's pretty good at that. They have chippy, grindy guys like Brandon Hagel, like Seth Jarvis, like Travis Konechny. We'll see who ends up drawing in as far as that last 12th forward. But if you're going to meet the moment, you got to play within yourself, and you got to do what you're good at. Canada's not going to win a hit-off. They're not going to win a fight. They're not going to win a brawl. That's not the style of hockey Canada is conducive to. If that means, hey, you got to just turn the other cheek, you eat a punch, you draw that instigator penalty on someone else, you're not going to get the acclaim from the TSN or the Sportsnet panel for toughness, but you're making the right decision there. Especially if you're one of the talented guys on this team, you don't want someone good sitting. You don't want Nathan McKinnon fighting a Tkachuk brother to try and get the Canadians going. If he gets goaded into one, or, if Drew Doughty, like they talked about on the United States broadcast before the game against Sweden, I forget who asked Drew Doughty, would you fight Matthew Tkachuk if he wanted to go on Thursday? That's a fine trade-off. If Drew Doughty's fighting Matthew Tkachuk, you're Canada, you'll take that trade-off if Doughty has to sit for 5 minutes and Tkachuk has to sit for 5 minutes. That's a good trade if you're Canada, but you don't want to get into one of those kinds of games because you're not set up for that. You don't have the personnel for that style of hockey. You need your transition game going. And for the United States to be successful, they need to get out to a lead. That's where you can really start to wear away at your opponent, wear away at Canada, and force them into uncomfortable situations. We said in that last segment, you want to put guys in positions where they're not comfortable. You want to make Sid, you want to make McDavid, you want to make Nathan McKinnon. You want to make those guys play defense because that's not their strong suit. And B, it means they're burning energy they could be using on offense, which is only playing to your advantage. Every fiber of my being as a sports fan is telling me Canada wins this game because A, it's really hard to beat the same team twice in a short period of time. It's really difficult to match the energy that the United States played with in that first game. It's going to be really hard to manufacture that type of adrenaline a second time. And you don't want to pop the bubble. If I were sitting in that room, if I were on Mike Sullivan's staff, I'd be telling him, guys, the fights are great. They definitely helped. I don't want you fighting just for the sake of fighting. You need to have a purpose. Everything in this game needs to have intent because that Canada team is going to be looking for blood. That Canadian team lost on home ice up in Montreal. They are playing for the glory. For playing for the glory is one of those things you don't really get a whole lot of opportunities to. For some of these guys, this might be the only chance they ever get to wear that jersey. Most of these guys will be on the team next year in Italy, but there are going to be one or two guys who aren't going to get to go on that trip. There are one or two guys, the goaltenders, any of them could end up being booted out for a Logan Thompson or someone else. There are forwards, there are defensemen who all could be subject to getting replaced between now and next February. So there's a lot to consider here. I think the United States is probably a slightly better team on paper, roster-wise. I think the goaltending and the defensive depth in particular stand out. I think the forward talent is reasonably even. I think I'm very curious to see how long it takes for these coaches, Mike Sullivan and John Cooper. God, that was embarrassing. It took me that long to remember John Cooper was coaching Canada. I apologize, John Cooper. As somebody who's in the John Cooper is the best coach in the NHL camp, that's not a good look. But if I'm Mike Sullivan, if I'm John Cooper, how long does it take me to get to, we're running 3 lines, we're running 2 pairs. How long can I do that realistically? What combinations do I want to try? Do I want to try and get Point with McKinnon or McDavid so they have a second guy with speed to complement them? Do I want to try and roll 3 lines evenly? How do I approach my defense? How do I feel about my defense? Do I want to pull someone out to keep Harley in? Who do I want to play Makar with because he was playing with Devon Toews, played with Shea Theodore a little bit, and Theodore's not an option now? There's a whole lot to consider, but if you're a sports fan, even a casual sports fan, this is easy. It's easy to get up for moments like this. This is why we do this. Best on best, winner take all for the glory. I struggle to think of a setting that's going to be able to match this until at least the end of June. If you're a hockey fan and you're hoping, if you're an Oilers fan and you're hoping the Oilers get to win a Stanley Cup this summer in early June, late June, this is as close as you're going to get to that feeling for a little while. I will be hoping the United States wins. I think Canada wins this game. I really do think Canada. And look, I hate doing the he's got that dog in him type of analysis because I think it's very simplistic and I don't think it does the gifted players of this sport justice. But Sidney Crosby, when the chips are down, is the Terminator. When Sidney Crosby is in a do or die situation, he finds a way, and he is what great players look like, and he will rise to this occasion. And I think Sidney Crosby is the rising tide that raises all boats for Canada in this game. I think that group comes out, hair on fire. They set the tone early. They get out to the lead early, and the United States, in trying to get it back into the game, 1 or 2 mistakes come back to bite them, and that's ultimately what's their undoing in this game. I think Canada gets out to a lead, and it forces the United States into uncomfortable or, frankly, unfortunate situations. Those unfortunate situations lead to mistakes. Those mistakes end up in the back of their net. I think something like 4-2 for a score, 4-2 Canada. I think the key for me, if Canada is going to win this game, they probably need a power play goal. We talked a little bit about that in the first segment. We broke out the dry erase board, looked at where guys line up. I think if you want Canada to win this game and to feel good about it, you want a power play goal to kind of get your nerves under you, to settle in and feel like, okay, we can score on Hellebuck. We have the lead. Let's try and force them into some mistakes as they chase the game. But that'll do it for today's edition of Locked On Oilers. If you could be so kind, please subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please leave the show a 5-star review. If you're watching on YouTube, that subscribe button's calling. Hit the alarm bell so you get a notification whenever new content goes live. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. After the final, we will do an in-depth conversation about the game. We'll talk a little bit about the Oilers ahead of the weekend and the return to the regular season. See you guys then.